We've talked about it. We both of us have attended Occupy meetings in the past, and healthcare is one of the big issues that the Occupy movement is dealing with right now. And there's a lot going on in the news. The Republicans are again trying to pass a repeal and replace of Obamacare, and Bernie Sanders has introduced the Medicare for All bill, as John Conyers has in the House. So, what's your take on these things? What's happening? What's going to happen? What needs to happen?
Well, it isn't just Occupy who's talking about this issue, and the fact that, well, last Wednesday was a historic moment, to be certain, and it's a historic moment not because Bernie Sanders introduced the legislation, but it's a historic moment because of the vast amount of people who are very sick and tired from a healthcare system that is interested in profits rather than our health. And you mentioned that Occupy has been interested in this, but there are hundreds and hundreds of organizations, not just individuals. And so it was a historic moment because this really isn't the first time that it has been talked about in the halls of Congress or in the White House. Richard Nixon actually was speaking of a single-payer plan back during his administration.
Well, Harry Truman, for that matter.
Yeah, and Harry Truman. So it's been spoken about for a long, long time. But the dog has been wagged by the tail for a very, very long time, and health insurance industry controls our entire health care. And the fact that the legislation why it is so historic, is that this is the first time it really has been introduced on the floor of the Senate, and it is certainly the first time, I take that back, Sanders has introduced similar legislation.
Numerous times, yeah.
But this is the first time that he has had 16 co-sponsors.
The first time he's had one co-sponsor.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And and though the House has received less news on this, there are currently 119 co-sponsors for the House legislation, which is a majority of the Democratic House. So the momentum is there, and the people's voice is behind it, and that is the reason that if you listen to conservative talk shows, you'll hear many of the conservative hosts saying, well, if single payer seems to be inevitable. And at this point in time it is, because the wool has been pulled back from the eyes of the population, and they know that they've been ripped off for quite long enough. Certainly the first thing that those who are in opposition to Medicare for All, which I guess the first thing we really need to talk about is what is Medicare for All. What has essentially been introduced in the Senate and in the House is what is actually called expanded and improved Medicare for All. So it isn't just a duplication of the current
dental
Medicare
care
system.
and eye care. And
it includes dental care,
hearing aids,
and eye care, hearing aids. It's a comprehensive bill, and there are 0 copays, 0 premiums. It is doing away and 0 deductibles.
The reason that I emphasized that it's been a hot topic in Occupy is that I feel that the Occupy movement, this is an outgrowth of the Occupy movement. The success that Bernie Sanders is finding in the House and Conyers is finding in the House would not have happened if not for the Occupy movement. I don't believe that the Sanders candidacy would have happened if it weren't for the Occupy. That was an awakening in America, and while the mainstream media was poo-pooing it and saying that it was leaderless and it didn't have any focus. If that was all bullshit, if you don't mind me saying so,
It certainly was.
and that it had a tremendous impact. It was the American Spring, if you will, and it propelled the Sanders campaign, and it propelled the health care issue to where it is today, and I believe eventually it will be inevitable that we'll have that. I just hope I see it in my lifetime.
And if you look back through history, this whole movement is actually following a very familiar trajectory. I mean, all movements have this kind of moments in them. I mean, the women's movement started with a similar thing to Occupy, and the bodies and the organizations that came together and started the women's movement were not the ones that actually carried it through to duration.
Sure.
But it was people coming together that made the difference, and that's what's going to make the difference here. There's 300 million of us, plus 300 plus million of us. There's just a handful of insurance executives. They have, of course, hundreds of lobbyists and hundreds and millions and billions of dollars.
They've got money, we've got people.
But we've got the people power.
Yeah.
And the people are making the voice heard. That's why we've got co-sponsors for both of these. So it's a comprehensive plan. It is coverage from conception to death. And of course, the first thing we're going to hear is, and if you can bring up that first PowerPoint, but the first thing we're going to hear is there's just no way at all we can possibly afford a Medicare for all plan. You can see here that per capita expenditures in the United States are almost double of the other countries who have universal coverage. So in other words, we are already paying twice what we need to be paying for comprehensive coverage for absolute.
We really can't afford not to do it, it's true.
We can't afford not to do it. And you'll notice the blue there. The blue is essentially public funding. All of the countries are almost 100% public funding for most of their health care. The United States, in terms of our public funding, we are already paying Medicare for all. And the other nations are doing it for a fraction of what we're doing. So what Medicare for All will do, not only will it be a system that is centered on health care rather than profits, because it's centered on health care rather than for profits, the costs are going to come down, because $1 out of every $3 that we spend on health care goes to administration. There is no reason for that kind of expenditure. So going to Medicare for All immediately eliminates that one-third expense there, or most of that one-third expense. Of course, there's going to be some administration.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So we're not only talking about administrative salaries and bonuses, incredibly disproportionate payments to the executive directors and board members of the insurance companies, but we're also talking about profits that have to be shared with shareholders. We're talking about advertising dollars, which amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars. All of that gets eliminated. Plus, with Medicare for All system, you have an economy of scale which is maxed out. It's the largest economy of scale that you can have. Whereas right now, the economy of scale is limited to the size of the clientele of insurance companies. So there are some very basic economic reasons, sound reasons, why the cheapest system available and the best system available is Medicare. It is a single-payer healthcare system. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know what a single-payer system is, but a single-payer is there's one payer paying it all, which would be Medicare. Yeah, the cost you mentioned, but I mean, you just think about it here on a local level in Silva. When you go to your primary care physician, you're met by essentially a barrage of administrators who are there to administrate the payment process to see that your physician gets his payment. That staff is going to be largely eliminated because he or she is no longer going to be dealing with multiple payers that may pay or may not pay. When you go to that physician is going to know exactly what is going to be covered because it's going to be on a yearly contractual basis, and they will know from the beginning of each and every year exactly what is covered and what is not under that plan.
And you won't have to deal with primary insurers and supplemental insurers
That's
and
right.
co-pays.
It's all going away.
All of that paperwork, which is such a headache, not only to doctors and their offices and hospitals, but to people. I mean, it can give you an ulcer to deal with all of those things. And, you worry about, did I miss this payment and that payment, and
when you go in for treatment at the hospital, you have to go a day before to get all of your paperwork
done. Yeah.
There is just absolutely no reason.
It's insane.
It is totally and completely insane. Yeah. And Medicare for All, both of these plans.
Show your card and you're in.
You show your card and you're in.
Yeah.
So expenses all across the board are going to be immediately reduced. That's one way that we're saving money. And the predictions are that Medicare for All will reduce medical costs. I don't remember the exact figures, but by billions of dollars a year. And so the funds that we are paying into the healthcare system can go into healthcare rather than into administrative costs for others' profits.
And I can testify that those systems work, and they're simple. Like, I've been in European countries and I've been in Canada, and when I needed medical help, they covered me, even though I didn't have a card, and I just walked in and they took care of me. There was no paperwork involved, and it was a thing of beauty, really. I mean, all the talk about waiting times and things, that's bullshit. The only thing that's for is elective surgeries and things like that. Yes, you might get put on a waiting list for months for things that aren't life-threatening, and there are people who are more important to take care of ahead of you. But if you have an immediate illness, they take care of you right there and then. It's so much more efficient than what we have in this country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings up another issue that the opposition is going to bring up. That I just heard it the other day from a pundit and said, well, it's this plan that Sanders has just introduced is just essentially pie in the sky because there's no plan in place as to how this is going to be funded. Even if the money is there, there's no plan in place. And it's never been analyzed, and that is just a complete falsehood.
Sure.
Single-payer systems have been analyzed by the Congressional Budget Office beginning in the 90s, and they have redone that many times. Not only has the Congressional Budget Office done analysis on it, state legislatures have had it analyzed. Every time it's analyzed and compared to any other systems, it comes back the most efficient and the most economical. And in 2013, a complete and total analysis was done upon the Conyers bill, and it shows efficiency. It shows that it's more economical. It shows that health improvements will, that efficiency, effectiveness, and outcomes are going to improve from the system. And it's not only just your word that these other systems have worked. We can look out across the world and we can see that these systems are working.
And people are happy with them.
And people are happy with them.
Yeah.
And they're not happy.
This is the worst system in the world. We do have technology, maybe that some other countries don't have in the American system, but in general, for day-to-day care, I've had to go to emergency rooms here and wait 6 hours. Insane.
And you talk about the medical equipment that we have in the United States.
Yeah.
We're duplicating a lot of very, very, very expensive medical equipment that doesn't need to be duplicated. With a universal single-payer system, even all of that is going to be based upon community need. Whereas right now, hospitals purchase the expensive equipment in order to make money off of that equipment. It needs to be communities deciding upon capital expenditures.
There's a few issues that, as I understand it, both the Sanders and the Conyers bills don't cover, and one of them I say is long-term care. It's not part of the Medicare for All bill.
Let's just take a look here. The two bills are going to have to be reconciled because they're not duplicates
They're not
of one
identical.
another.
Right.
In terms of long-term care, thanks for bringing that up. HR 676 covers long-term care. The S 1804, the long-term care remains in Medicaid, which Medicaid is administered by the states.
Okay.
So those two things are, there's several things that, they're not complete duplicates of one another, and we're going to take a look here at the differences, and this is one of the differences, is the long-term.
Clarify then, what is the need for a second program in Medicaid if you have one program that covers everybody?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And that's why the Sanders bill has left that to Medicaid when one payer could do it much better.
Yeah.
So
the Conyers bill combines everything.
The Conyers bill, long-term care is comprehensively covered. And in the 1804, it's left.
I see. Well, maybe that's the division, so it's leaving that cost state. Well, although Medicaid is highly subsidized by the federal government.
Subsidized by the federal government,
yeah.
Administered by the state.
Yeah, so it hardly makes sense.
So it doesn't, to me it doesn't make
yeah.
sense, but it's there. And
go ahead. Yeah.
And if you could go to the next slide there, what's the cost? Okay, the cost sharing, yes. So in HR 676, there is no cost sharing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no co-payments, no deductibles, no premiums. And this speaks to the power of the people because Bernie's bill originally had co-pays. His bill that came out on Wednesday eliminated all co-pays except for prescription drugs. And there are caps on that. There's yearly caps on that of $200. And then there are exceptions to the co-pays.
And so the Conyers bill includes, there's no co-pays even for prescription drugs?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And 1804 has co-pays.
So again, one deficiency I still see, and it's not necessarily a deficiency in this bill, but maybe a deficiency in the general health care, not the insurance company, but but health care system in this country, is that most of the hospitals today have been swallowed up and privatized by large corporations, and so they're run for profit again rather than for the purpose of serving the community. And we see the manifestation of that in hospitals closing in rural areas where it's simply not profitable, like happened in Macon County, where they're closing the maternity ward. I mean, that's crazy. They're leaving a community isolated without maternity care. And I'm sure that that's not an isolated situation. I'm sure that's happening all over America. What do we do about that?
Well, the Conyers bill, H.R. 676, addresses that in the fact that Medicare funding will only go. I mean, in both bills, any entity that is receiving the funds has to be approved and has to meet specific standards to be approved. But in the Conyers bill, the Conyers bill has a 15-year phase-out period of for-profit institutions. They will only fund community and nonprofit organizations, and that phase-out period takes care of the investors in that bonds will be put in place to pay the investors for the facilities and for the capital. They will not be paid for loss of profits, which they should not be. The 1804 does not do anything about that. It continues to pay the private providers, which that's, in my opinion, a really, really big flaw in 1804, because that is where 24% of the savings is going to come from, is by the elimination of the for-profit institutions there. So that's a big point of contention between the two bills, and certainly something that's going to have to be resolved. And let's go into the next slide there. Start of the system, the phase-in period. H.R. 676 is universal.
Universal coverage.
Universal coverage
from day one.
From day one. And the phase-in period is 1 year after one entire year after implementation. So, if the bill were to pass this year, say in November, it would not go into effect in 2018. It would go into effect in 2019. On the 1804, it goes into, it begins the phase-in. The first, if it passed in October, the phase-in period would begin January of
it would cover people up to 18 years old and from 55 on in the first year.
Yes, it's a 4-year phase-in period, and we can let's take a look at the next slide there. So the transition is 676 is immediate, 1804 is over that 4-year period. Let's go on to the next slide there. As you said, it's 0 to 18 years old. It's immediate into the system. If you're in the, I don't remember all those, and I can't do that from here, but the IHS, the TRICARE, several other things, you can choose to remain in those, or you can go into the Medicare for All plan. And then the second year it's the same, and the third year the same, and then the fourth year everybody goes in there. As far as I'm concerned, this is another problem with the 1804, is that that if you're in the IHS or in the, what's the other one up there?
What's the IHS?
The Indian Health Services or the VA. So the Indian Health Services and the VA have the option to continue to operate under the 1804 indefinitely under the House bill. Veterans Administration and the IHS are all combined together. The next slide shows the 19 to 34 years old If they're in those same plans, they can stay in those and be the same for the next 2 years, and then finally they have the option in the fourth year to go into it. The next slide is what is that? 35 to 45. It's essentially the same thing, but in the third year, then you have the option to buy into the Medicare for All system. Next slide. This next age group, they have the option to buy into Medicare in the second year or the third year, and then in the fourth year, they automatically go into the full time. And then the next age group is the same as the 18 to 34-year-olds. They don't have the option to go into the system until the fourth year.
So, something that's always puzzled me is why it seems like conservatives and people who are very pro-business would so much be in favor of this.
That is actually shifting, and that's one reason for this huge shift in Congress is because business people are finally, particularly small business people, are realizing that health insurance is eating them alive. Well, and with Medicare for All, they're relieved of that burden.
Well, small and large business.
Large,
I mean,
yes.
when you have thousands of employees and you are required by law to provide them with health care insurance, that burden is taken off their back, and they still have to pay into Medicare just like they do now.
Yeah, but minimal compared to
much less money. So it's a tremendous burden. It will make America more competitive on the global market because goods and services won't be as expensive. So I don't see a downside for the business community on that, and you would think that anybody who is fiscally conservative would be in favor of this. And that's why they've done it in other countries as well.
That is absolutely true, but it has been, by large corporations in particular, have used this as a wedge to stifle union movement, essentially. It's a benefit they can hold over the heads of prospective employees.
I find that hard. It seems to me that the bottom line is what drives businesses to politically. I'm sure that there's maybe at one time there was. I mean, unions are hardly a factor anymore. A very small percentage of Americans belong to unions at this time, and I hope that changes. But it's the bottom line that's going to be what is the deciding factor for most businesses, and I think
that bottom line has shifted considerably over the last couple of decades.
Well, I think the realization of that it's always been true.
It has always been true, but I mean it is magnified over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and I think that as another benefit of introducing this legislation, even though it seemingly doesn't stand a chance of passing, is the debate that will follow it.
Absolutely.
It's going to make people understand the economics behind
Absolutely.
it and shift public opinion and the business community. And, by the time this is over, I personally will not be surprised if enough of a movement arises out of this, if the Republican Congress passes single-payer health care and Donald Trump signs it.
I think you're right. It's going to happen. Because the business community, there are actually business organizations. We were talking about the organizations that are behind this plan. There are business organizations that are supporting this legislation.
Yeah.
And certainly there are multiple small businesses and large to medium to large businesses who are behind this Medicare for All, because the bottom line, and the bottom line is it is costing them a fortune. There are Canadian businesses that would like to establish business here in the United States, and they cannot do it because it would bankrupt them
Sure.
because of the healthcare system.
And so really the only impediment to this I can see is the healthcare insurance lobby and the pharmaceutical
Yes.
lobby.
Mhm.
Those are the ones that are spreading misinformation
They certainly are.
and
Yes.
and mischaracterizing
Absolutely.
the nature of the economics that are involved. But once we get down to really examining the nitty-gritty of it, it's inevitable, I think, that the business community is going to get strongly behind this, and that true conservatives will get behind this as well.
It's a win. It's a win for conservatives. It's a win for liberal, because it is the win for conservatives is that the Medicare for all does not do away with the private sector. We still are going to have private providers, so the private marketplace in terms of our health care is still going to be there.
Although you mentioned that in the Conyers bill, actually, we would not have private providers.
We will have private providers. We won't have for-profit private non-profit private entities.
So doctors can still be paid a very good salary, and nurses can probably be paid a better salary than they're getting now, which I think is important also.
And that's another point. What's going to happen to doctors' salaries? Well, all of the studies indicate that they're going to do just as well as they are now, with a whole lot less stress.
Right. Yeah, they won't have to hire somebody just to take care of the paperwork,
Absolutely.
which is what they're doing.
And they won't have to fight with the insurance companies to get care for a patient that they know needs.
It's a more reliable system.
Absolutely.
And it's better for everybody, except for the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely, and in conjunction with that, HR 676 and 1804 also have provisions in there for the people who are going to lose their jobs. There's HR 676. There's a clause in there that those who are losing their jobs are to be hired first in the new jobs that are going to be coming along, which there's going to be lots of new jobs in actual healthcare. And it also provides for training, and then 1804 also provides for training. So we're taking care of the people who are going to be displaced because of this.
It's important to think about that.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Because there's good people working in that industry.
Right.
We're not going to compensate the CEOs for their loss of $1 million jobs, but they'll find other things to do in insurance. It's a very profitable business. I'm sure they'll do that. So,
Is there more to this PowerPoint presentation?
no,
That's it?
that's it.
That's it, okay.
We could talk forever, but
Well,
there's many other things to talk about.
well, there's plenty more to talk about, I would think. For instance, what can people do at this point, to help promote this legislation? What's our next step?
The people's voice is critical to this, because the insurance and pharmaceutical industries are going to vehemently oppose this. We're already starting to hear we're starting to hear that all of the arguments, I mean, they're worn out arguments. They're the same arguments they've been using for decades. We can't afford it. The other one I love is it's just
cradle to grave. And it's interesting to look at the political dynamics. I mean, this is a real looking glass that we have right now, because those politicians who are coming out and criticizing it, especially the Democrats, follow the money and see where, it just happens. What a coincidence. It happens to be the same Democrats who are receiving the most money from the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries in the form of campaign contributions. And so it's very easy to make that divide right now, and just to see. And it's also interesting to see what the impact of the popularity of Sanders and Conyers legislation is right now. How it's forced politicians who previously ridiculed the whole concept of single payer, suddenly hedging themselves and coming. Even what's his name from West Virginia, the most conservative Democrat in Congress right now is the senator from West Virginia, and I can't seem to remember his name, but he's actually being challenged from the left on the he'll be primaried, and all of a sudden he comes out and says, well, we'll have to look at single payer health care, even though he's not coming out for it at this point. And Bacher, I guess, in Montana, who was in charge of the committee when President Obama introduced the Affordable Care Act, and he took single payer off the table. He would not allow proponents of single payer health care to be in on the discussion when Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was being discussed in Congress, and the Democrats had a majority.
He had single payer advocates arrested.
Had what?
He had. But they were protesting at the committee hearings, and he had them arrested.
Right. Well, he's come around now and said, yes, we have to look at single payer health care. So we're watching that dynamic take place, where voices of ordinary people and movements are impacting the political process and forcing, they're bending the political will of some of the most powerful corporations in America and the people that they are funding in Congress. Don't let anyone tell you that people don't have power. That's the biggest lie of all.
That is a huge lie, and they do not want us to know that.
Right.
and they want us to remain divided on this issue. They certainly want this to look like this is a far left, socialist, communist movement.
Yeah, they want you to think that we're the extremists.
We're the extremists.
But they're the extremists.
Absolutely, they are certainly the extremists.
They represent a small percentage of the population.
And the people power is emerging because people are tired of having for-profit insurance companies whose only motivation is making money and improving the bottom line, being the entity that is making our healthcare decisions. And people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that our healthcare decisions are not in our hands. They're not in the hands of our healthcare providers. They're in the hands of for-profit insurance companies. They care nothing about our health. They care only for their bottom line.
So, as you were saying, it's eminently important that that we all write to our Congress people, Republican and Democrat. Like here in the 11th Congressional District, we have Mark Meadows, the head of the Freedom Caucus, and the biggest Tea Party advocate in the House of Representatives. But yes, write to Mark Meadows and swamp him. Let him get thousands of letters and phone calls, and you watch him move. You watch him start hedging his position. I don't care how extreme he is and in what he claims to represent. When he starts feeling that kind of heat and that kind of pressure, you watch him move, and you watch the other Republicans, and you watch the corporate Democrats move too. Because that's exactly what's going to happen, and they are going to get primaried, primarily because of this issue, and a few other issues. But healthcare, I think, is more and more on the minds of people because it's gotten just so ridiculously expensive.
Yes, Wednesday was a day of doom for corporate Democrats because suddenly Medicare for All became a litmus test. And it is going to be an issue in 2018, probably 2020.
For sure.
And
no coincidence that Kamala Harris came on board and Cory Booker. Yeah.
Not a coincidence. Oh, and the other thing that is going to be an issue is is incrementalism. We have to do this in increments, and 1804 is a response to that incrementalist mindset. Is that we have to phase this in.
Although 4 years is not that bad in terms of
it's not necessary, and the Medicare was first of all implemented within a year's time. Millions of people, without the aid of computers, came on without any glitches. We've already got a system in place. We already have the organizations in place to deal with this. Bringing it all online in 1 year is not a big deal. But the incrementalists are going to be telling us it's just, healthcare is too complicated. And I totally agree with them that healthcare is very complicated. And that's why we have intelligent people in the field of healthcare. Paying for healthcare is not complicated, except in our dysfunctional and corrupt system. It is extraordinarily complicated. We can simplify that, and we can simplify it overnight. But the incremental plans are we can go incrementally by having the public option, and actually 1804 does have kind of a public option in there to buy.
That's right. Yeah, there's a
public option is exactly what the health insurance industry wants, because it is a beautiful gift to them. Because a public option, guess who's going on the public option? Old and the sick. And who does that leave for the health insurance industries to block to? The marketing.
People who don't need insurance.
People who don't need it. And they will have these lavish,
but actually,
plans.
I'm not sure that's accurate, because as I recall upon reading it, was that people who would be able to buy in would be, in the first year, it would cover everyone who's 55 and older and everyone who's 0 to 18. And so it's those in the middle that could buy in.
Right.
It's not the oldest ones that would buy in, because they'd be on Medicaid.
It's the sick that are going to buy in those age groups.
Oh, in the younger age groups, you mean?
Yes.
Well, that may be. The only argument I could see for, and I'm not necessarily advocating for it, is for the incremental, 4-year incremental, is that gives a chance to retrain all the people that are, that would lose employment in the healthcare insurance industry.
Of course, most of those people in the healthcare industry are already healthcare professionals.
But in general, I disagree with putting forward an incremental program, even if that would be acceptable in this case with a 4-year program. I never agree with the tactic of going in with what you want to be the ultimate outcome. You always ask for the best, you can get, and be willing to compromise down. You don't start out where you're willing to compromise to, and because you're always going to lose more in the legislative process. It's such a sausage factory, you know.
Except I don't think there's any reason for compromising this. The people are behind this.
Well, in general, I agree with that. Yeah.
And that's whose voice is going to be heard is the people's voice. We have to be sure of that.
Yeah.
But the problem with the incremental approach is that it not only is it exactly what the insurance industry wants, but it removes the savings from the system.
In the beginning.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
And then we also know that this isn't the first time these incremental approaches have been tried. They've been tried in probably at least 9 or 10 different states throughout the last 20 years, and every time they have failed. And they fell because the funding, and those incremental approaches remove the big, huge savings that come
that we could realize on year one.
That we can realize it on year one. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the public option is what health over profits are referring to as the profit option. It's good for insurance and pharmaceuticals, and it's bad for us. And we certainly there's going to be reconciliation. The bills are not exact duplicates of one another. Those are just the 4 points of main differences. There's other minor differences there as well. The big thing about both of them is they are ultimately universal from cradle to death. Both of them are really strong on reproductive rights and reproductive provisions, and they both have done away with co-pays, premiums, and the like of that. So those are what are good between. We need to continue to push for certainly all of the major organizations which physicians for a national health program have been advocating for this for the last 20 years. If you want data on this issue, go to that site. They have tons of data. That's where you're going to find all of the analysis that have been done.
So would you repeat that again? What's the name of the website?
Oh, do you have it up there? Okay. So it's Physicians for a National Health Program. The other organization is Health Over Profit, and the third organization is Healthcare Now. Those three organizations, all three of those organizations, by the way, have been supportive of H.R. 676, and their support has not wavered on that. They are definitely behind the H.R. 676. And when reconciliation comes, that's the way they want that reconciliation to move, is toward H.R. 676.
Well, I think that's about it for our discussion today, unless there's anything else you have to say about it.
I think that I'm sure there are other things that we've missed, but
are there any local organizations that are dealing with this issue and organizing around this issue?
None in our immediate vicinity.
Might be something in Asheville. Well, if folks watching this are aware of anything that's happening on a local level, let us know, and we'll announce it in upcoming programming. So, good. Thanks, Alan.
Thank
Been
you,
good.